stack of paper.
Usually you see them called a stockers, and I'm like,
Oh, right. All over. Right now.
Well, you can go ahead and do it. We both have to do something. You gotta have a mission you're gonna have. I ended up with more capital.
Oh, yeah. There's some groups that are at. I want to make sure I refer to. Oh, yeah, right, yeah. I won't remember. Eyelids drooping. I'm quite a senior designer. Oh, that guy. Yeah, no, that's good. That could be really spot on. That could be helpful. Oh yeah, I love it. Okay, thank you. Yeah. That'll be good. Thank you. Yeah.
All right, welcome back. Great group to do panels and discussion. So the context, it's not quite have a loud enough voice. What's your name? There you go. If you get the people in the back who can't hear, wake up, and you get the rest of them. Just put up your hand, and everybody who wants to put up your hand.
Does that work? Yeah.
Yours with this panel is this. I think I was at an AVET conference in Baltimore a while back. And there was a speaker they brought in and talked about the reality of engineering career paths. And said engineering institutions should think about this. Because we teach three-semester calculus and differential equations and all of these courses, we have a standard way to sort of unfold an engineering curriculum, and then in 5 years, they won't be touching it at all. All right, that was stated in sort of in a real sort of blunt way for all of us engineering educators who knew exactly how to put together a curriculum. Anyways, whether that's true or not, completely, I think there is some basis to say that many engineers find themselves in leadership positions. And even amongst our constituents, when we've had them give feedback, they've asked that question, what are you doing in your program for teaching leadership or guiding students toward leadership opportunities? What does that look like? And sometimes we don't have a good answer. So maybe it's part of that conversation. We thought, this is a good panel to talk about. If we can get feedback from both from engineers who've been in the industry, who are at various stages of their career, seeing various leadership responsibilities. What does that look like? What does that look like from a Christian perspective? But then also to hear from you, your questions, thoughts, and get some discussion and thoughts going along those lines. So that's the background for this rather informal panel session. So with that, we'll be opening it up for questions. I'd like to have the panelists here have an opportunity to introduce themselves and who they are and a little bit about their background and maybe a little bit about their path to where they're working and how they're working now. So I don't have any particular order. So that's leadership.
There you go. Sure. I'm Travis DeYoung. I graduated from Dordt in 2004 with a focus on mechanical engineering. I started at a company called MedTech at the time. It's now Civco Radiotherapy. We make positioning devices for radiation therapy products. So basically when people are going through cancer treatment, we're making the devices that put them in position, hold them in position, and help to make sure the radiation is getting delivered to the right spot. And I've been there, for 15 years, and I've been in the engineering manager role for the past 2. Started there just as an entry-level engineer, and it was a completely new area for me. So they do not teach you anything about radiation therapy in engineering school, short of the physics that are kind of involved in that. And so one of the things that I really had to do was spend a lot of time learning about radiation therapy. And an engineering schooling really helped me prepare for that. You are introduced to a lot of different things. You need to dig in, you need to learn about it. And in the sense that we were able to help people who are going through a really rough time, it's easy to identify with that and be really passionate about that. And so I think, for me it was really important to put a lot of energy into learning that area and learning what radiation therapy is, what the processes look like, what are the challenges as we design products for that. And being passionate about that and working through that to be able to properly design the products that we were working on, I think really helped to make me successful in that role. And as that happened, as you learn some of those things and you have a little bit of success, then you get opportunities to grow within the company. And I was able to do that. I had a lead engineer position, which is, I was doing design work, I was leading some junior engineers, and then for me, I really had to kind of figure out what I wanted to do next. Did I want to stay on the technical side or get a little bit more into the management, business, strategic side of things? And I happened to be doing a Bible study with a group from my church, and we were going through the book Man in the Mirror, and part of that is figuring out what your purpose is. And I took that pretty seriously, and I spent a significant amount of time praying and looking through the Bible, verses that were meaningful to me, and trying to find out what resonated for me within that and where God was calling me. And for me, it was Philippians 2 verses 2 through 4, and it really said, it called out to me and said, you're meant to help lead people and help them find their best selves. And at that time, there wasn't a manager position open, and but some things happened, and it became clear that was what I was called to, and the position opened up, and I was able to take it, and it's been really good for me to have that, know that this is what God has been calling me to do, and to be in that role. That's been one of the most meaningful things. So the past few years for me have really been great to be in that role and have that opportunity to really identify and feel like I'm where I belong right now. So that's kind of sort of how I got here.
I'm Amanda Goodell. I work for a full-service engineering and architecture consulting firm based out of Storm Lake. About 20% of my projects then are interdisciplinary, but most of what I do is municipal work. So I ended up there was definitely not my plan. It was God's plan. I graduated from Dordt in 2015. Wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to be doing, but I knew municipal to be a pretty broad discipline. So I just kind of started interviewing places and naively didn't know any of the business questions to ask, but God managed to direct me to the right place. And started out with a lot of design work. The thing with municipal engineering is that there's a lot of client interaction. And then the thing with ISG is it's a very fast growing firm. And I think most engineering firms usually have an average age in the 50s or something. Ours is 32. So that kind of led to the fact that, hey, there's definitely lots of ways to lead and to step up and to start that client interaction early on. So I guess I kind of fell into it because God placed me there. Definitely wasn't planned by my part. I'd say I'm probably in a bit of a transition stage right now since it's been 4 years since I graduated and working on getting my PE this year. I'm starting to come to a point where I can probably make more decisions on if I want to go more into the technical side or the business, just like Travis was talking about. So it's kind of where I'm at right now.
So Mike Adams, many of you heard my story yesterday, and you heard probably more about the latter half. With Ethiopia, and so I'm CEO right now, but 25 years ago graduated from Dordt, and I was pretty techie, in terms of I think it was a lot of my dad kind of following in his footsteps. He liked e-transfer, and so he had stamped that on my brain somewhere in 6th or 7th grade, I think, but all the books, and everything. So I remember I did internships. I got married to Kim in college. She was going to Dordt. So part of it, my experience was, okay, I got to work like quite a few hours to make this go, and so I worked at a number of places in town. That was a great experience, doing design, working in manufacturing a little bit, and so I felt like, and then it was the plant which I talked about yesterday was. At that time it was McCord, then I went to Bayer, this German company, and so I got an internship there. And I remember, it's funny, I took a 5th year, so I pretty much finished my engineering in 4 years, and I took a 5th year and took some courses I wanted to take, and I worked, because my wife Kim was a year behind me. But I would go back and forth interning at Bayer, and I laugh at that time, because as interns, sometimes you don't know any better, right? So and I was carrying a computer with me. When I started at Bayer, they didn't have any engineers there at the plant. They had them in Detroit, but they didn't have any at the plant. So I would physically carry a computer back home from there, and I was writing code. And I thought, this is great, So I wasn't getting paid for probably half my time for sure, right? But, So we try not to do that to interns now, but so I wrote a lot of heat transfer, all their heat transfer programs, and when I was an intern, and did a lot of things that I probably, in hindsight, I didn't need to do, but it did help me in terms of getting a job there, certainly. And then, so for the first years, I was a product engineer, and really liked, and still do, really liked the engineering side of it. Felt like the mechanical engineering education, I always felt like, you know, the students that I was in class with were a lot smarter, but I got through, right? But in spite of that, I felt like I was really doing very well, you know, and knew what I needed to do, and so that really helped. And so I ended up traveling back and forth to Germany, where the technical center was in Stuttgart, and that was a really great experience. We didn't have kids yet. My wife Kim was getting her master's, and so that was a good time to kind of put the throttle down at work and do that. And then as far as progression, yeah, some similarities. I stayed in the technical, and I think in my situation that those things were recognized, and then that's probably how I was promoted. So it was really saying, okay, you're really good technically, well then you must need to lead people, right? That's not always a good decision. But in Bayer was a really big company, and so they had a technical track that you would become a chief engineer if you really made it, you know. And so I stepped into an engineering manager position, and then eventually with some of the travel and the different plants around the world, I was able to step into a chief engineer position. And it was about at that time that the Bayer was then starting to look to close the plant, and then you guys know the rest of the story. But some of the things that helped me a little bit, so in my frame of reference, the technical was really what got me ahead, you might say. That was really what was recognized. So the ability to come out of college and hit the ground running was very helpful, and so that was good and helped my progression. Some things that, and I'm sure we'll talk about later, but some things that really helped too is Bayer kind of puts you through some personality testing, which you know I didn't really. You kind of know, I didn't realize how different people can be, you know, and so that was really good to have, you know, early in your career, because otherwise you think, well, why is she behaving the way she is? You know, is it my thinking always right? You know, and so realizing different personalities and how people come from different approaches was also helpful in my roadmap. But in the end, you know, it seemed like a lot of providence, because I could have planned a lot of things, and those things wouldn't have happened. So the opportunity to step into a CEO role, I've been doing that. So I did the engineering for 10 years. In the last 15, I've been in the CEO role, and that transition, as I talked about a little bit yesterday, was because I'd been there 10 years in the details, that wasn't as tough a transition. But learning the people side, obviously, is always, I'm still learning about that all the time. You know, the technical in some ways, as many of you know, can be a little more straightforward, right? And a little more predictable for sure. And the people side really challenges us and challenges, I think, you know, how are we representing Christ? So anyway, it's a little my story.
One more question for you in that path. This sounds like I'm tying stories together, but none of you said I left college to be a leader. Or if you forgot to say it, maybe. So, right. But all of you have a sense of God calling you to where you were going. Now, it seems like God calls us to certain fields and then accidentally throws us into leadership if we follow Him. But I'm wondering if we're talking to a young person in college, high school, what do we say to them, to those who might be good leaders? How do we, I think the Christian community might have an aversion to maybe sometimes talking about that early on, or do you feel like it's something you grow into? What would you be your advice? I have long questions now. It's actually giving students time to think. But what would you be your advice to high school students, or encouragement to high school or college students about leadership? And Christian leadership in particular, now that you've sort of walked that.
Start again, or do we go backwards?
We can go backwards. That'd be fair. Yeah. By the way, I forgot to say, Man in the Mirror. That was a pivotal book for me too. So that was an interesting. I forgot to mention that. I heard you say that, but yeah, I think I would say that leadership at a younger age, learning about leadership would be very advantageous. I think it is something you grow into, but there's some fundamentals about being a Christian leader that, Scripture, we can use Jesus' example, but if we don't ever talk about them, and we really don't exercise our minds around that, we kind of have to fumble around for a long time. I think I fumbled around for a long time, and I think eventually you get there, or maybe in 10 years I will, but, but it would be nice, I think, and I think, Ethan, you're touching on something, I don't know, put my finger on it, but a lot of times success in business is not always viewed as a good thing. And then your student gets out there and they are being successful and they're kind of like, sometimes depending on what kind of background they came up from, they're almost apologetic instead of realizing the Lord has placed them there for such a time as this, right? And to go with the Lord's power forward instead of being apologetic. And I think that's, one of the challenges I see of Christian engineers or Christian students is many times, it can depend on the personality of the person too, but, many times they can struggle in industry a little bit because they're not equipped. And so I think learning leadership skills early on, learning what the Bible says about it, using Christ's example, would be a great thing to somehow put in the curriculum and get a younger
I gotta follow that.
You don't always all have to answer these. Yes.
I'm not gonna repeat on how to get Christian leadership into education, I guess, but I was just thinking that, I think a lot of times I feel like those of us who came from Dordt end up in leadership positions because even though we might not be asking for it, I think other people can see, even if they're not leaders, or even if they're not Christians, they can see the perseverance that we have, and the servant leadership, I think, is what separates us in mindset from non-Christian leaders. That might be instilled in them anyway from past experiences that they've had, but the fact that that's taught to us, I think, is really helpful. I know it's helped me remember on some days when angry clients yell at you on the phone for 10 minutes, and you're like, okay, I'm just being a servant. I don't know everything. That's been helpful.
Yeah, good points, and I do think there are certain aspects that do need to be taught, and being introduced to some of the servant leadership idea and what the Bible says about leadership and looking at Jesus' life and the way that he acted are really important ways for us to talk to students about that. And I mean, there are experiences that help you grow into leadership as well, and some of those things have to happen. But to prepare them for somewhere that they can look back on when those opportunities come, I think it's important, because otherwise we just kind of fumble through it and learn the hard way. And how can we equip a little bit better to know where to look, at least for some guidance to how to.
Did you guys have any leadership roles while you were students?
I played soccer at Dordt here, and I was able to captain the team a little bit, and then as you go through projects, there's always those opportunities to lead, and I think you either gravitate toward that and take those opportunities, or maybe you shy away from them, and I think it's important to encourage those opportunities. And not everybody can lead a project every time, but how do you kind of make sure that people get the opportunities to have that experience and struggle through it, because that's what it takes sometimes.
I'm a planner at heart, way down deep, so that part of me becomes very easy. People part not as much. So at Dordt, I was involved in the concrete canoe club, and I was co-captain 1 year of that. Lots of planning needed for that, so that was good for me. And then I was committee chair for the sustainability committee. I was at symposium 1 year as well, so some good opportunities.
I had similar, one of the things I noticed though, so I had similar leadership opportunities at Dordt, and they were helpful. But they're amongst a community of believers that are all similar worldview. And when I got out into industry, particularly if you've kind of been, I wouldn't say I was sheltered, but Christian school, right, Mom? And then, on to Dordt, and so you get out into the world a little bit. So I was prepared for that, but there were, as a Christian and particularly a Christian leader, you're trying to figure out, okay, now how do I deal with the folks that clearly don't have a Christian worldview, and what's my response to that? And that sometimes can be the part that takes a while to get to understand how to manage.
Amanda, question for you. You mentioned in passing that you didn't know the business questions to ask when you interviewed.
Mhm.
So, presumably now you do. What are those business questions?
Knowing how a company is run, definitely just doing your background research, which is a lot easier today with LinkedIn and how many other things that you can kind of see how things are done. I well, God placed me in a company that has a Christian CEO who made it evident, I think, to most of my coworkers. So finding out what the company is like that you're getting into, and maybe what their 5-year plan is, or where the company is planning to go. I never thought of asking her those questions, so that was, I don't know, maybe sport there on my part, but.
Thank you. So was some of your leadership kind of more just solving problems and seeing that there maybe wasn't kind of like, if there was kind of a gap or a void, and then kind of stepping into that? I think you kind of touched a little bit. I mean, you guys kind of said too it wasn't like super intentional. You didn't jump into leadership, but stepped into that too.
I think for me, at Civco, there's a lot of, engineers have a lot of responsibility for working through some of the challenges. And, the engineers manage projects as well. I mean, you're familiar a little bit. And so you need to figure out how a lot of things work, and how a lot of different departments are working and making things happen. And so that kind of naturally leads to understanding at a higher level, at least, what it takes to make things click within the company. And so you have to be able to influence people who you don't have authority over, which is an excellent training for leadership. I mean, you have to develop those relationships, and I think you have to learn to respect what each person is doing within the company. Everybody has an important role. They're there for a reason, and you can't just have a company of engineers. You can't just have a company of manufacturers. It has to be a whole team working together. And so as you work through that and develop those relationships and kind of gain some of that influence just by developing those relationships, it does, I think, naturally lead to leadership positions for engineers, at least within Civco, and that's the experience I can speak to. It's, like I said, it's the only company I've worked for, so it's a little unique from that perspective, but that's what I see.
As you seek to educate yourself about leadership, when you saw the opportunity coming, like find a mentor, read a bunch of books, or do you have a strategy on that at that point?
for me, it was, when I got into the lead engineer role, the company did a good job of doing a little bit of leadership training. And then probably 3 years ago or so, as kind of the people leaders got together and read a book called The Servant by Jim Hunter. And that's another fabulous book that basically just looks at Jesus as an example for leadership. And again, our company, I would not say is a Christian company. And the leadership at the time certainly weren't, they knew of Christianity and maybe had some Christian background, but I would not say they were active Christians, but acknowledged that there were good aspects of this book and that as a company we wanted to be servant leaders. So that's something that for me has made it a little bit easier. But yeah, and then from that point, it's been, there's a group of 4 of us at the company that meet and we'll read books and discuss them, and that's been really good. The past 2 years or so probably we've been doing that. So I certainly have gone after books that help me understand leadership a little bit better, and that's been a way that I've really dove into my calling at this point.
For me, it's been, since we're such a young company, there's a lot of opportunities to lead, especially in municipal engineering, just as we each take on our own clients and kind of work closer towards getting our licensure and managing projects and stuff. And sometimes maybe forced on you if you're not careful. So for me, it's been spending more time in prayer and reading my Bible, reaching out to others, talking through thoughts to try to make sure that I'm going in the direction that God has in plan and not just allowing myself to be jostled around in the mix of fast-paced engineering firm.
Yeah, I would agree with both of what you said. I think early on, I read a lot of books, and some of them stick, some of them don't. And on leadership, like today, I have a typically Tuesdays and Thursdays at lunch, we have our manufacturing plant, and we've got all the different functions, accounting, engineering, of course, is pretty big. But I take the leaders on the floor, and then through operations, we have lunch and go through a book. And so we've been doing that for some time. And that's been real valuable to get kind of the organization kind of toward the common focus, and then you can kind of pick which book you want to go through too, and not beating over their head, just kind of you can pick a mixture of books. But I also agree that if I don't start in the Word and if I'm not in the Spirit, then I can blow it real quick. So all the books in the world they're valuable, and there's truth there. But if I'm not a Spirit-led, God-led leader, it isn't going to work. My humanness is going to come in, and someone's going to go, and you're going to fire back, and then, and as a leader, when you do that, you lose a lot, right? Because you can't take that back. And so, I think successful leaders are ones that really have a vision that's planted on the Lord, and as we all know, that's a day-to-day struggle to stay in that. So I think both are really valuable.
Sort of 2 questions. One is, how much do you think of being a leader is like a trait you're born with, part of your disposition, as a human, and how much of that can be taught and learned? And then tagging on with that, so each of you learn by experience in different circumstances. So if you were to say, I want to add a leadership component to an engineering curriculum, what would that look like? Is it reading books? Is it engineering experiences for students, personality tests? What would you do if you were in charge of that?
I can start this one, go that way. That's a good question. I think that certainly there is, leadership that does sometimes come more naturally for some because of personality. sometimes someone, and as engineers, we're not always the outgoing ones, right? We chose engineering for a reason. No, not always. And so it can be a challenge for us as engineers, and our personalities might be more the person that's going to drill down into the details, right? And we're not necessarily, we might be looking at our shoelaces more than looking forward. But I think, irregardless, having a curriculum would be really valuable, because no matter what personality the person has, or they can learn what their strengths and weaknesses are and learn how to be a better leader. So while some come naturally, everyone I really can benefit a lot. So then, in terms of the curriculum, I think, I don't know, it's a good question. I think the first thoughts that come to my mind are some of the, I think, yes, a personality would be very helpful, personality test, or before you get to work to understand a little bit more about yourself. And then I think just some basic, it could be a book, it could be just, a few seminars, but just really talking about the basics of leadership, and then bringing Christ into that as well. Of course, we would be really valuable. And I don't think it has to be, even just a little bit would go a long ways to someone understanding their future environment.
Yeah. I listened to you so well, I forgot the question.
So if you were to create a program for a school, what would that look like? And then our engineers sort of, or leaders sort of
Yep.
made.
Okay, I remember
or
now. Yeah, and I'd say that definitely does have something to do with your disposition. And knowing yourself and your strengths and weaknesses is a big part of it, because when you're gonna have to interact with so many different people, whether they're in your company or clients or something, and not everybody is nice, quiet Christians. So, yeah, it definitely, I'd say, a big thing is being able to examine yourself and how you interact with others, and knowing how you're gonna respond to certain situations. What that looks like in a classroom, that's pretty hard to imagine.
We could yell at you more often.
Right. Stress, There's enough
Yeah, I think everyone having to have practiced it at some point to do the project. And senior design, it seems like there's always one person that ends up kind of being the lead. And I don't know if that's something that we introduced into labs or something, where you rotate out, where so-and-so is going to be the lead for this, and they coordinate such and such, and maybe there's less direction from professors, or
Yeah, I think an important part is being aware of who you are and what strengths and weaknesses you have. And like, if I think back to college, I was just trying to survive. And, I didn't have the time, or I didn't spend the time to be that reflective. And it's something that, personally, I know I need to work on, because it's not something that comes naturally to me. But I think bringing attention to that, whether it's personality tests or just kind of understanding who you are, and maybe like who your classmates are, right? So you see the different personality types, and understand that a little bit better. I think that does go a long way in just bringing that awareness. And I guess I'm answering your question backwards, but I think again, personalities make a difference to that leadership disposition. And the other thing I think about is, as you talk about, there's always that, it seems like somebody grabs the reins of that senior design project and takes the lead. And is it because they're concerned about the grade, or they're just, for some reason they're more motivated? And what drives them to do that? Are they just, do they tend more to do that, or to sit back? And you can train yourself out of those things, or work on changing some of those things. But it's a combination of things, I think, and that's a tough part to answer,
There's
and
a
I struggle
question
with it too.
in the back, Captain, I'll come back up this direction.
So what's the most prominent negative quality or characteristic that you see in the generation coming out? You could also call it opportunity for improvement. And then how do you help lead through that or around that?
So are you talking about millennials or Generation X?
New employees that you interact with, or just people.
Is it my turn to start? Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think, one of the things that I struggle with is probably the younger, students now, their tendency to not want face-to-face interactions. They've grown up on their phones or devices and interacting through social media or whatever it may be. I mean, I remember an engineering advisory board, and it was the last one, it was the one before, we talked about, like, they struggle writing emails in a proper manner, and that's kind of scary. One of the things that I've seen, and I've kind of read this too, is so you can look at kind of the levels of energy of interactions. So a face-to-face interaction is kind of the highest level of interaction that you can have, and then it's a phone call, and then it's an email or a text or something like that. And I think what I struggle with is really encouraging people to if we have a couple of different locations, and if you need to talk to somebody, pick up the phone and call them and have that conversation. We can have video chats, and you can see some of the non-verbal communication that happens. And I've had that, I had to learn that too. We have a guy in Florida that I worked with a lot, and there was probably a year and a half or 2 years where we just did, every time we talked, it was a video call, so that we could learn each other a little bit better. And now I can basically picture his gestures as I'm talking to him. It's probably the same for him, but to me, that's probably one of the biggest things.
Do you have other things to add?
That's what I see too.
I see,
That's good.
to that.
She'll text you.
What are you struggling with?
I mean, face-to-face was probably a good one.
I have a question that goes back to the previous one on that saying that the leadership does kind of come as a quality more naturally to some people. So on the flip side of that coin, you're all in leadership, which means there's people that are following you. So in education, how do we train good followers? Because we emphasize training good leaders a fair amount before those students that will at some point lead in education, but are more naturally and are actually gifted in following and supporting. How do we equip them in the same way we equip our leaders?
I think some of the same qualities really, because to be a good follower, I have to understand myself a little bit. I have to understand what drives me. I would almost answer it the same way. It's a great question. You'd probably have to, you might add some things that the leader should understand though too, which is, how the organization works together, right? And some of those organizational dynamics. But I really think it's pretty similar. That some of the same things you can get both in the same discussion. Yeah.
I like what you said there. There's definitely a lot of the same things. But then I think there's also a difference between passive and active following.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing when to ask questions, not just assuming that, the lead review engineer will catch this if it's wrong or something.
Yeah,
That's
true.
definitely something
Right.
the communication is still important even if you're a follower.
There have been several questions in the context of what could we have done better to help you become leaders, but anytime we add stuff, we typically have to take stuff out. So what in your engineering program do you think was a waste of time and we should have gone.
Where do we start?
Time for the Dordt faculty to leave.
Nolan, I've been talking for years.
Top three maybe, right?
I don't think you actually need to take it out. I mean, maybe it's a cop-out answer from me, but I really don't think, I know you guys always have to hour by hour blocks, and how am I gonna fit it in? I know it's wired that way, but it seems to me in some of our courses that we had perspective courses, and we could, like Engineering 390, maybe it's called something else now, it could have fit into that course fine, and I think we could have woven it without. Yeah, I don't think we should cut out calculus. I'd love that. That would have been great. But I don't think we can take physics and chemistry and all the basics out. But I think we had some electives, and some weren't electives, but they were, more perspective courses that definitely it could fit into. I don't think there was room.
Yeah, looking for ways to integrate it into existing courses. I think you talked about labs. Yeah, how do you kind of say this person's going to be the leader for this lab, or as you do your intro courses or whatever it is, you can do some of the personality tests and talk about some of that. It's a huge challenge. I mean, how do you squeeze all the things that you want these kids to know into 4 years? And
I'm just because I was thinking about, I taught engineering econ last year, and I could see it fitting in there. I mean, we're kind of fitting in material there it's not at all hardcore engineering. We're saying you're probably going to run into economics decisions. So why not? You're probably going to run into leadership things too. So I think there's a place that could easily fit in.
So you talked about there's some things we could do undergrad, but I also heard many of you say that you weren't quite ready for it yet, perhaps? Is that accurate? So my first question is, do you think that you were ready to learn that as undergrads? My second question is there something that we could do to support the alumni as they're kind of moving up? Do you think that alumni might be interested in supporting each other in terms of learning leadership at all the different stages?
yeah, I think to be ready for it is hard to know, because you have so many people at different levels in their maturity and different experiences. I think, as I look back, was I ready for it? Probably not, but it would give me something to look back to. Like, I could remember, oh, we talked about this, or I stumbled across it in my notes, or, I at least, it's familiar, it's something that I've seen, and now I know it's out there and I can go back and look for it. Because if you don't even know what to look for, that can be really difficult. So it's a fair question, but I think there's some advantage yet.
Yeah, some sort of mentorship setup would be kind of cool among alumni, but also difficult with everyone so spread out, and those are also things you can't really force either. Almost seems like it would have to be more centered maybe around your local church or Christian family or something, depending on the situation, of course. But.
Yeah, I think do both of those, and then I think, one thing that maybe already happens, I don't know, but Christian leadership, it takes resources, but maybe, I don't know, the summer, or it's probably hard during the year, but if you're wanting to reach alumni, potentially you could offer, materials and courses that help, maybe not a course, but a seminar. I know some of the universities are already doing that, maybe it's being done here. But I think as a working professional, that would be interesting, because it's not too often that you see the integration of faith. It's more and more prevalent with some institutes now around the country, but pointing alumni to that and that material, I think would be valuable, because what they're going to face the first few years, or 5 years, or 10 years, and having some thoughts around that, I think would make some sense. Yeah.
I was positionally biased here. I apologize to this side of the room. I haven't turned this side. So the last question is anybody closest to this side, if you want. If I missed anybody here. Otherwise, there's a hand back here is, yeah, go ahead, grab us something.
So you guys spoke to a little bit about how like the Christian worldview has helped in leadership roles. Can you speak to maybe how, or times where maybe it has cost you, where it maybe would have been easier to have a different worldview, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah, I can start with that. I think certainly when you're, I think for myself early on, the first 10 years, I mean, it's a little easier now because I own the company, so it's kind of, can't get rid of Mike, right? But in the, so that's a little easier. But in the first 10 years, I think, as you're trying to walk your walk, there are times that, light attracts light, dark doesn't like light. And there are times when you will run up against darkness and you're going to get beat up for it. And but I found that typically that might be a setback, but the Lord takes you through those things. I know there was some things that took place where you think, well, okay, I know like early in my career, it was very common, and this is all gone now, which is not, I don't know if it's all gone, but there was the old boys club still, right? So certain things expected when you went on trips, right? If you didn't do that, you're probably not going to succeed. Well, of course, I didn't do that, and so I'm heading back to the hotel, right? It's all right, guys, but that's not for me. And I think I caught just the tail end of that, a little bit, and then at least, it may be prevalent in other industries and so on, but I'm not sure if it is as much anymore. And so early on, and that was when I was the kind of real techie, certainly there was some relationships that were strained because there was some older guys in my case that were like, oh, this guy's, goody, and of course, and they didn't like that being shined. Oh, you think we're bad, don't you? Yeah, you think we're this, right? But again, if you stay humble and it worked itself through just fine, and some of those guys that, a couple of them, I never was real close to, but at least it was something they respected you over time. That's my recollection of in more of a secular environment.
Yeah, I'd say relationally is the area for me also that I've just noticed a difference. I'm a little introverted, so partially to that as well, but when I first started, there's just a lot of friendly banter that was maybe to a degree that I wasn't comfortable participating in with my Christian background, and so I often didn't, and so I think they thought I was a little offstandish for quite a while, so maybe just took a lot longer to get them to trust me, and for me to be comfortable around them as well.
Yeah, I think, I just think, the past couple of years for me, like once you're in a leadership position, sometimes it's just a lot easier to lose your cool. And, if there's somebody you're struggling with or whatever the case may be, if you don't care about them, you're just trying to get ahead, you fire them, you get rid of them, you move them somewhere else. But if you're really, with the Christian worldview and caring about every person, sometimes you have to do some really hard things to be able to help them through, help them see where they're struggling. And there's a lot, there's a number of easier ways to deal with it, but that's not always the right thing. And so it's a little, I've experienced the same thing as what Mike was talking about too, and same with Amanda, but there's also this other aspect where sometimes the right thing is just harder, and caring about that person and leading them means that you have to, it's tough conversations, and probably as engineers we really don't like the tough conversations. And but it's what drives that is that you care for that person rather than just, hey, why don't you just move on?
Thank you so much for your time. think about as we move into training, teaching, lead. So, next session.
Yeah, I think we're about 5 minutes behind, but that's okay. Let's take a 5-minute break just to reset up here, and then we'll do the paper session after that. So we'll start the paper session 7:25-ish.